I sat in the sterile law office, surrounded by my family, as Grandpa's attorney shuffled his papers. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My parents sat across from me, their eyes fixed on the mahogany desk between us. We hadn't spoken properly in months, not since our last fight about money. I never imagined that Grandpa's will reading would be where everything would finally come to light. The truth about the trust fund that disappeared, the college savings that vanished, and the lies that had been building for years. When the lawyer pulled out the financial records and said, "Now, regarding the trust transfers," my stomach dropped. Before I continue, if you're watching this video, let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button to support my channel. Growing up in small-town Massachusetts, some of my fondest memories were with my grandfather. He was the one who taught me everything I know about carpentry, taking me into his workshop every weekend to build birdhouses and fix furniture. "These hands can create anything, Nolan," he would say, guiding my small fingers around a hammer. By the time I was 12, I could identify every tool in his shed and knew exactly how to use each one. Fishing was our other shared passion. Every summer morning before the sun had fully risen, Grandpa would knock on my bedroom window with his fishing rod in hand. We would drive to Silver Lake in his old blue pickup truck, talking about everything and nothing. Those quiet mornings on the water watching our lines disappear into the misty lake were where he shared his most valuable life lessons. Success is not just about making money, Nolan. It is about building something that lasts, he would tell me. Grandpa had built his own success from nothing. Starting as a small hardware store owner, he had gradually expanded into property investments around town. By the time I was in high school, he owned several commercial buildings on Main Street and had established himself as a respected businessman in our community. Our special ritual was Sunday breakfast at Joe's Diner. Every week, without fail, we would sit in the same corner booth. Grandpa always ordered the same thing: black coffee, scrambled eggs, and sourdough toast. I would usually get chocolate chip pancakes as a kid, eventually graduating to the breakfast burrito as a teenager. The waitresses all knew us by name, and our orders would start cooking the moment we walked through the door. It was during these breakfasts that Grandpa would ask about my dreams, my struggles, and my achievements. Unlike at home, where conversations often revolved around my brother Kyle's medical needs with Grandpa, I was the center of attention. Kyle had been sick for as long as I could remember. He was born with a congenital heart defect that required multiple surgeries before he even started kindergarten. My childhood memories are punctuated by hospital visits, hushed conversations between my parents, and being dropped off at neighbors' houses during medical emergencies. I understood why my parents focused on Kyle. He needed them more than I did. While I was winning science fairs and making the honor roll, Kyle was fighting for his life. It seemed selfish to want more attention when my brother was in and out of hospitals, so I became self-sufficient. I learned to cook my own meals, do my own laundry, and manage my schoolwork without supervision. My academic achievements became my identity. If I could not have my parents' attention through neediness, I would earn it through success. Every A on my report card, every award at school assemblies was a silent plea for them to notice me. Sometimes they did, a quick good job or a pat on the shoulder before returning to discussions of Kyle's medication schedule or upcoming appointments. Grandpa noticed, though. He never missed a school play or a debate competition. He was there front row clapping the loudest. "Your brother needs their care, but you need their pride," he told me once. "And when they cannot give it, know that I am proud enough for both of them." It was during my junior year of high school that Grandpa first mentioned the trust fund. We were at our Sunday breakfast discussing college applications. I had my heart set on Northwestern University, but was worried about the cost. "Do not worry about the money," Nolan Grandpa said confidently. "I have set up trust funds for both you and Kyle. Yours will more than cover your education. I want you to choose your school based on what is best for your future, not on what costs less." That conversation lifted an enormous weight from my shoulders. Knowing that my education was secure, allowed me to apply to my dream schools without restriction. When the acceptance letter from Northwestern came, I called Grandpa before I even told my parents. In the months before his unexpected passing, our conversations became more serious. Grandpa seemed concerned about something, though he never fully explained what. Family should always protect each other, Nolan, he told me during our last fishing trip. But sometimes people make mistakes thinking they are doing the right thing. Remember that your future is yours to build, and I have made sure of that. I did not understand the gravity of his words then. I wish I had asked him to explain. The first signs that something was wrong with the family finances came during my senior year. I overheard my parents arguing about medical bills one night when they thought I was asleep. The words experimental treatment and overseas specialists kept coming up. Kyle's condition had worsened, and the treatments available in the United States were not working. The next morning, my mother asked if she could borrow the money I had saved from my summer job at the local hardware store. I had been saving for a laptop for college, but how could I say no? It was for Kyle. I handed over my savings account passbook without question. A few weeks later, my father mentioned family sacrifices during dinner. "We all need to pull together for Kyle right now," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Some opportunities might need to be postponed." I thought he meant the family vacation we had been planning. I had no idea what was really happening behind closed doors. My acceptance letter to Northwestern University arrived with a financial aid package that covered only a quarter of the total cost. I was not worried at first. I had Grandpa's trust fund to rely on. But when I mentioned it to my parents, expecting them to share my excitement, their reaction caught me completely off guard. "What trust fund, my mother?" asked, a strange expression crossing her face. "The one Grandpa set up for my college." "He told me about it last year," I explained, confused by her response. My parents exchanged a look I could not decipher. My father cleared his throat. "Your grandfather mentioned a lot of things, Nolan, but with his business struggles in recent years, well, those plans fell through. There is no college fund." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I had built all my plans around that promise. When I called Grandpa to discuss it, he seemed shocked and confused, insisting that the trust existed. But he was in his mid-70s then, and my parents suggested his memory was becoming unreliable. I wanted to believe my grandfather, but the doubt my parents planted took root. Maybe he had intended to create the trust, but never got around to it. Maybe his business had suffered losses I did not know about. I was left with no choice but to scramble for alternative solutions. I took out substantial student loans. I worked 3 part-time jobs, morning shifts at a coffee shop, evening shifts at the library, and weekend landscaping work. My grades suffered as I balanced work and studies, but I was determined to stay at Northwestern despite the financial strain. While I was working myself to exhaustion, the distance between me and my family grew. My parents rarely called, always too busy with Kyle's treatment. They missed my freshman year parents' weekend because Kyle had an appointment with a specialist. They could not attend my sophomore year honor society induction because they were in Boston for his therapy. I understood, but it hurt. Each absence reinforced the feeling that I was an afterthought in their lives. When I did go home for holidays, the conversations revolved around Kyle's progress and medical updates. My achievements and struggles were footnotes, if mentioned at all. During winter break of my junior year, I finally gathered the courage to ask directly about the trust fund. We were decorating the Christmas tree, a rare moment of family normalcy. Grandpa mentioned the trust fund again. When I called him last week, I said casually, hanging a glass ornament on a branch. He seemed confused about why I was working so many jobs. My mother's hand stilled on the string of lights she was untangling. "Your brother needed it more, Nolan. The treatments in Switzerland were experimental. Insurance would not cover them. What were we supposed to do?" The implication of her words took a moment to sink in. "Wait, are you saying there was a trust fund? You used my college money for Kyle's treatments. Your grandfather set up trusts for both of you boys, my father interjected. But family takes care of family. Kyle would have died without those treatments. So you just took it. Without telling me, you let me take out loans and work 3 jobs when there was money set aside for my education. The betrayal felt like ice in my veins. We were going to pay you back, my mother said defensively. Once Kyle was stable, your brother's life was at stake, my father added. I know it is hard to understand, but we had to make an impossible choice. I wanted to scream, to break something, to make them understand what they had done. But looking at the family photos on the tree, including several of Kyle in hospital beds, I swallowed my anger. How could I compete with my brother's survival? What kind of person would I be if I valued my education over his life? So I said nothing more. I finished decorating the tree and excused myself to go for a walk. I called Grandpa from a park bench, but he did not answer. I later learned he was meeting with his lawyer that day. The breaking point came after Kyle's health finally improved following the expensive treatments. The specialists in Switzerland and experimental drugs had worked. He was in remission and stronger than he had been in years. I should have been purely happy about this development, and part of me was, but another part noticed other changes too. My parents bought a new SUV to replace their 10-year-old sedan. They renovated the kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Meanwhile, I was living in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates, eating ramen noodles, and working every spare hour to make my loan payments. During my senior year spring break, I came home to find contractors installing a hot tub on the back deck. Something in me snapped. Is this where my college fund went to? I asked my parents that night. Hot tubs and granite countertops. That is not fair, Nolan, my mother replied sharply. We have been through hell for years. We deserve some comfort now that Kyle is better, and I deserve the education Grandpa wanted to give me. I shot back. Instead, I will be paying off loans for the next 20 years. You have always been selfish, my father, said his voice cold. Your brother nearly died multiple times, and all you can think about is money. This is not about money, I shouted. This is about you stealing from me and lying about it for years. Did Grandpa even know what you did with the trust? Their silence was answer enough. I left that night and returned to school early. We barely spoke after that. I graduated without them present. They had an excuse about Kyle having a checkup, but social media showed they were actually at a neighbor's barbecue that day. The final thread of our relationship had snapped. The news of Grandpa's passing hit me like a physical blow. Despite being 78, he had always seemed invincible to me, still fishing every week, still puttering around his workshop. The heart attack came suddenly while he was working in his garden. By the time the neighbor found him, it was too late. I flew back home immediately, a knot of grief lodged in my throat. The funeral was a blur of faces and condolences. My parents kept their distance, offering only stiff, formal interactions when absolutely necessary. Kyle, now healthier than he had been in years, seemed confused by the tension his eyes darting between us during the service. After the burial, as people were leaving the cemetery, Grandpa's attorney, Mr. Sullivan, approached me. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who had been my grandfather's friend for decades. Nolan, your grandfather insisted that you be present at the reading of the will, he said quietly, handing me a business card with a date and time written on the back. It's important that you come. There was something in his tone, a significance beyond the usual formalities. I nodded, tucking the card into my pocket, wondering what Grandpa had planned. The reading was set for 3 days later. I spent the intervening time at a hotel rather than staying with my parents. I could not bear the thought of forced, small talk and pretending the rift between us did not exist, especially not while grieving Grandpa. Mr. Sullivan's office was in a converted Victorian home on Elm Street. The conference room held a large oak table where my family gathered: my parents, Kyle, 2 aunts, an uncle, and a few cousins. My parents sat at the far end, as distant from me physically as we were emotionally. The atmosphere was tense, but polite, as Mr. Sullivan began with the standard legal preamble. He distributed various personal items first. Grandpa's fishing gear came to me along with his woodworking tools. My brother received his collection of vintage watches. Aunts and uncles were given family heirlooms and mementos. As the reading progressed to the financial aspects, I noticed my parents becoming increasingly restless. My mother kept glancing at her watch. My father repeatedly loosened his tie, as though it was suddenly too tight. Now, regarding the main estate, Mr. Sullivan said, placing a thick folder on the table, "Before I proceed, Howard asked me to share some background information." He opened the folder and removed several documents, arranging them methodically. 15 years ago, Howard established 2 trust funds for his grandsons. Equal amounts were placed in each trust, one for Nolan's education and future endeavors, and one for Kyle's medical needs and education. The initial deposit in each trust was $200,000, with additional contributions made over the years. My parents exchanged glances. My mother's knuckles turned white as she gripped her purse. However, Mr. Sullivan continued approximately 7 years ago, Howard discovered irregularities in these accounts. Specifically, multiple unauthorized transfers were made from Nolan's trust to Kyle's medical fund. He slid several bank statements across the table. I leaned forward, scanning the documents with growing disbelief. There it was, in black and white: systematic withdrawals from my trust fund, followed by deposits into an account labeled Kyle Morgan Medical. The total amount diverted from Nolan's trust was $285,000, Mr. Sullivan stated flatly. These transfers were authorized by Jonathan and Diana Morgan, who had been granted limited administrative access as contingent trustees. My father's face had gone pale. My mother stared at her lap. What Howard found particularly disturbing, the lawyer continued, was that these transfers occurred while Nolan was being told no such trust existed. Howard provided me with recordings of phone conversations with Nolan, where the young man clearly believed he had no trust fund, despite Howard's insistence to the contrary. The room had gone completely silent. I could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the wall, counting off seconds in the unbearable tension. Upon discovering this breach of fiduciary duty, Howard initiated a private investigation. He documented everything thoroughly, as was his nature. Mr. Sullivan placed another document on the table: my parents' signatures on transfer authorizations dated throughout my college years. Most troubling to Howard was that these funds were not used exclusively for Kyle's medical treatments. While a portion did go toward legitimate medical expenses, bank records indicate that after Kyle's recovery, significant amounts were spent on home renovations, a new vehicle, and various luxury items. I felt sick. The kitchen remodel, the new SUV, the hot tub, all potentially funded with money that should have paid for my education. Mr. Sullivan turned to look directly at my parents. "Howard wanted me to ask if you have anything to say to your son before I continue with the provisions he made to address this situation." My parents could not look at me. My mother's eyes were fixed on her hands, now trembling in her lap. My father stared at a point on the wall above my head. Kyle looked horrified. "Mom, Dad, did you really do this?" he whispered. Their silence was damning. Mr. Sullivan cleared his throat and continued. In light of these discoveries, Howard made specific provisions in his will to rectify the situation. The remaining estate, including the commercial properties on Main Street, Howard's personal residence, and his investment portfolio valued at approximately $1.2 million, is to be divided as follows. He turned a page in the will. To Kyle Morgan, I leave the sum of $100,000 to be held in trust until he reaches the age of 30, with provisions for medical expenses as needed. Kyle nodded, seemingly unsurprised by his relatively modest inheritance. To Jonathan and Diana Morgan, Mr. Sullivan continued, I leave the sum of $10,000 and my sincere hope that you will reflect on the values I tried to instill in this family." My mother made a small, choked sound. "The remainder of my estate, including all properties, investments, and liquid assets, I leave to my grandson, Nolan Morgan, with the stipulation that a portion be used to pay off any educational debt he has incurred as a result of the misappropriation of his trust fund." I could hardly breathe. The magnitude of what Grandpa had done, the investigation, the documentation, the justice he had arranged from beyond the grave, was overwhelming. Additionally, Mr. Sullivan said, producing an envelope, "Howard left this letter for Nolan to be read privately." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. There were technical details, paperwork to sign questions from relatives. Through it all, my parents sat in stunned silence, unable to defend or explain their actions to the family members who now regarded them with shocked disappointment. As the meeting concluded, my parents tried to approach me in the hallway. "Nolan, you have to understand," my father began. "Not now," I cut him off. "Maybe not ever." I left them standing there, the weight of their betrayal finally visible for all to see. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I opened Grandpa's letter with trembling hands. His familiar handwriting brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Dear Nolan," it began, "if you are reading this, then Mr. Sullivan has explained what happened with your trust fund. I am sorry I did not uncover the truth sooner. I suspected something was wrong when you mentioned student loans during your sophomore year, but it took time to piece everything together. By the time I had proof the damage was done, I want you to know that I never intended for you to struggle. The trust I established was meant to give you freedom to pursue your dreams without financial burden. When I discovered what had happened, I was heartbroken, not just because of the money, but because of the breach of trust between parents and child. I have tried to make this right the only way I know how. The inheritance I leave you cannot undo the years of hardship you endured, but I hope it provides you with the security and opportunities that should have been yours all along. Remember what I taught you. Success is not just about money, but about building something that lasts." The most valuable things I built in my lifetime were not properties or businesses, but the values I tried to pass on to you. Honesty, integrity, resilience. You embody these qualities more than anyone. I love you, grandson. Build a good life. And when you can try to forgive your parents, not for their sake, but for yours, holding on to anger only weighs down the person carrying it. With all my love, Grandpa. I read the letter 3 times each reading, bringing fresh waves of emotion, grief, vindication, love, and a profound sense of being known and valued by the one person who had always seen me clearly. The weeks after the will reading were a time of practical changes and emotional processing. I used part of the inheritance to pay off my student loans, a weight lifted that had been crushing me for years. I decided to honor Grandpa's legacy by starting a small woodworking business, using the skills he had taught me and the workshop I had inherited. My parents made multiple attempts to explain themselves. "We were desperate," my mother said during one awkward phone call. "The doctors gave Kyle a 30% chance without the experimental treatment." "We always intended to pay you back," my father insisted. Once things stabilized, their justifications rang hollow. They had options they never pursued. Second mortgages, payment plans, fundraising. Instead, they chose to steal from one child to save another, then lied about it for years. Even worse, they continued spending the money on luxuries long after Kyle's treatments were complete. Kyle reached out separately. We met at a coffee shop downtown, away from our parents' influence. "I had no idea," he said, his face etched with guilt. "I would never have wanted my treatment to come at your expense." I believed him. Kyle had always been a good brother, never using his illness to manipulate or seeking special treatment. He was as much a victim of our parents' decisions as I was in his own way. "It is not your fault," I assured him. "I never resented you, only the choices they made. We agreed to maintain our brotherly relationship independent of our parents." He was the one innocent party in all of this. As for my parents, I decided to maintain distance while I worked through my feelings. I moved into Grandpa's house, renovating it slowly and making it my own. The familiar rooms where I had spent so many happy childhood hours became my sanctuary as I built my new business and my new life. The emotional healing took longer than the practical adjustments. I cycled through anger, vindication, grief, and confusion. How could the people who were supposed to protect me betray me so thoroughly? How could they watch me struggle, under crushing debt, knowing they had taken what was rightfully mine? A therapist helped me work through these questions. You can understand someone's desperation without excusing their actions, she told me. And you can forgive without allowing them back into a position where they can hurt you again. Gradually, I established a new normal. My woodworking business gained a reputation for quality craftsmanship. I became involved in the community as Grandpa had been teaching weekend carpentry classes for kids at the recreation center. I developed close friendships that became the chosen family I relied on. As for my parents, I eventually agreed to occasional structured interactions, Christmas dinner, the odd family gathering. But our relationship had fundamentally changed. Trust once broken so completely cannot be fully restored. Like a mended vase, the cracks remain visible even after the pieces are glued back together. The most valuable lesson I learned through all this was about the true meaning of family. Family is not just about blood relation, it is about who shows up for you consistently, who tells you the truth, even when it is difficult, who values your dreams as much as their own. Grandpa was more family to me than my parents ever were, not because of the inheritance, but because of the unshakable support he provided throughout my life. I still have Grandpa's letter. It is framed in my workshop, a daily reminder that even in our darkest moments, we are not alone if we are loved truly by even one person. As I reflect on my journey, I wonder how many of you have experienced betrayal from those closest to you and how you found your way forward. Have you had to redefine what family means to you? Have you discovered that sometimes the people who support us most are not those we are born to, but those we choose? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they are not alone in their struggle. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, our worth is not determined by how others treat us, but by how we choose to rebuild after betrayal.